on the ridge roads. There are nights when the world hushes like a congregation caught holding its breath. The trees don't sway so much as listen. The creeks don't chatter but wait. On such a night, 3 ordinary lives bent toward the same stone in the same valley, one carrying a child, one carrying a rifle, one carrying a promise he had no right to make. By weeks, in the mountain would call for a trial older than any courthouse, and the truth would arrive whether any of us were ready or not. What we bury doesn't disappear. It puts down roots. Nora Keaton was 6 days past due and 5 minutes from quitting when the pain lifted her up and set her down harder. She folded against a fence post, gripped the field wire, and breathed the way Hester had taught her 4 counts in, 6 counts out, as if she could trick her own lungs into patience. Keep your eyes on that light, Hester Pike said, lantern swinging from one hand, the other under Nora's elbow. Luann left it burning. We're close. I can smell the coffee, Nora said, which wasn't true. But a little lie never hurt a laboring woman if it kept her feet moving. Behind them, the laurel thicket made a noise like something rearranging itself. Not wind, not deer. The sound carried intention the way a match carries heat even before it flares. Don't look back, Hester said, too softly to be a command. Nora looked. There is a particular dark that isn't emptiness so much as prescience shape made out of the absence of every other thing. It slid between rhododendron and creek rock in jointed pieces that didn't quite add up until Nora turned her head. And then it did. No face to put a name to. No eyes to accuse. Only the contour of a man that hadn't agreed to be one yet. Keep moving, Hester said, and the calm in her voice felt like a hand on Nora's back. He has no business across a threshold without an invitation. The porch light at Luann's place burned steady. That bulb was on a timer because Luann's eyes had gone, and she didn't trust her memory after a stroke took her good strings. Folks had teased her about spending for a gadget. Tonight, it was salvation. The front door stood open. Luann sat in her rocker with 2 quilts stacked in her lap, and a single-shot Stevens laid across them like a hymn book. Get in the house, she said, voice like hickory bark. Let the dead and what belongs to them talk to the steps. A contraction buckled Nora to her knees. Her water broke across the boards. And for half a foolish heartbeat she apologized for the mess, and then the next wave made apology impossible. Hester and Luann shouldered her down the hall, past family pictures that looked like strangers, to a bed made tight and ready. Out in the yard, the dark gathered itself into the outline Nora had feared since she was a girl working tobacco on the Pike place. When it spoke, the voice sounded like wind over glass bottles in a ditch. Hester, said the not-quite man, you know my mark. You called my name under the sycamore at Miller's Ford when your pantry was mold and your field was mud. You buried a boar at the crossing, and you promised me the first good thing born after the flood broke. A bargain's a bargain. I promised an offering. Merritt, Hester said, using the name it wore most often around here, Merritt Thorn. Sometimes Alder, sometimes Keen, always a little too polished for the county. I did not promise a life. You promised the first good thing, Merritt said, and though he held himself like a man, the patience behind his voice belonged to something older. A child is good. A child is first. I am here to collect what is owed. You are not coming across that sill, Luann called, checking the Stevens with hands that trembled only when the air turned cold. You can stand in my yard and talk yourself to death. Nora's breath jammed in her throat with the next contraction. Hester counted with her, then turned toward the hall. It's trying the back way, she said. Luann nodded. Hang a bell on that door when this is over. Merritt's tone changed, a new voice climbing under his own like a friend leaning in. Nora, it said, and wore the sound of Nora's brother, a brother who'd run off to Lexington and let his promises rot in his truck bed. It's all right, sis. You don't want the baby born into debt. Better I carry it away and set it somewhere safe. Nora's skin went cold. It knows, she whispered. It knows names. It knows what it can buy. Hester said, shut your ears. Honey, open your body. The next wave hit. Nora turned her face to the wall and bore down as if she could push the past out with the child. At the doorframe, the shape that called itself Merritt Thorn waited with the patience of water. It could stand there all night. It had. Before. Now? Hester said. And Nora did what women have always done with, or without permission. Daniel Ricks drove home from the kind of war that stains you in places only you can see with a duffel that smelled like tints and solvent, a coffee can of screws, and a rifle he hadn't meant to keep, but did. He wanted 3 things: quiet he didn't have to earn, a boundary he could trust, and the kind of tired that came from a day working, not a night watching. His family place lay in a pocket of the valley where the creek used to cut a silver seam through low pasture until the company restored it to a trickle that forgot itself whenever July ran short on rain. The porch sagged. The roof had a poplar hole patched with tar and prayer. The witness tree on the east linear white oak with a blaze cut in 1935 still wore its scar like a badge. On Thursday morning, Daniel walked his boundaries with survey tape, a hammer, and a stubbornness that had kept him alive long after it stopped being stylish. He tied pink flagging on hedge posts, set a stone on a stone at the old corner, and felt something in his chest loosen. You could live inside a line that held. You could be a man in a place like that. He heard the trucks before he saw them. 3 in a row. New paint and old noise. Flags in the beds like they were auditioning for a parade no one else wanted. The lead truck held a man with a wrestler's neck and a face that looked at you like you were a problem he could solve with a set of pliers. Royce Talbot cattle. Rough timber. A cousin on the county board who liked the taste of applause. You Ricks? Royce said, though he already knew. Morning, Daniel said, trying on civility first. You put that pink string on my side. Royce said, I marked my line. Daniel said, same as my grandfather marked it. Royce nodded toward the pasture, as if the grass had something to confess. Your granddaddy sold us this wedge for grazing. We've been running cows up here 10 years. He sold the timber, Daniel said, not the dirt. Paper says so. Paper, Royce said, and spat into the weeds like he'd found a bitter in his teeth. Paper don't put up fence. Men do. Then bring a man who can read the deed, Daniel said, too tired to trim the edge off it. Roy smiled with no joy in it. We'll bring a surveyor tomorrow. Settle it like adults. Bring a woman, too, Daniel said. Women read better when the men start crowding the page. They might have parted with nothing worse than muttered threats if the boy in the second truck, Roy's nephew by the look and swagger, had tried to snipe a beer can into Daniel's henhouse to hear the birds panic. Tin struck wood. Hens exploded white and frantic. And something inside Daniel stood up without asking permission. He stepped off the porch with his hands open. Voice level. You made your point. Now go. What followed lasted 5 seconds and the rest of the summer. Nobody could later say who went for what first. When the quiet fell, the county surveyor lay on his side with a hole in his neck where no hole should be. And the nephew sat in the dust holding a hand that would be a reminder for the rest of his life. Daniel held the rifle and did not remember firing. Royce looked at the blood like he was reading a diagram. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He adjusted the brim of his cap as if sun had suddenly complicated itself. You'll wish you'd killed me clean, he said. I aimed at the dirt. Daniel said. You know that. Doesn't matter what you aimed at. Royce said. Matters what happened. Daniel didn't argue. In the flats, men say the same thing with nicer grammar. That evening, the coyote came up the lane like he owned a key. He paused in front of the steps and sat on his haunches, head cocked, not looking at the henhouse at all. Another shape gathered behind him, no smell, no heat, only the knowledge of a door you hoped would hold. You're tidy, the shape said, and Daniel heard it with his ears and his bones. You like your corners square. Somebody ought to, Daniel said. You marked a line. It said, that pleases me. Daniel's fingers went numb on the rifle stock. Those men you met today, the voice went on, pleasant as persuasion. They don't honor a line unless it's written on a man's body. I can arrange that for you. I've seen enough writing on bodies. Daniel said, I want coffee and a fence that means what it says. You may get one, the voice said, amused. The other will be harder. When morning came, it brought the surveyor's assistant. a solemn young woman named Cora Stiles who laid the deed on the hood of her car, traced the metes and bounds with a forefinger, and read them aloud. She found the old blaze. She followed the wall. She shook her head at Royce. The line's his. She said, "Your uncle bought timber, not pasture." Royce accepted it the way a man accepts a splinter. He wouldn't dig for it yet. He'd wait until it festered. He backed his truck down the lane and left without tearing anything up. That was something. It wasn't peace. That night, the coyote returned with the moon. He stood at the edge of the yard and smiled in that way coyotes have when they want you to think they're funny. "You're alone," said the voice behind him. "I prefer it." Daniel lied. The dark didn't argue. It didn't need to. It had time. Saturday mornings. The market behind the high school filled with tables that all looked like the same table until you came close. Tomatoes that remembered sun. Pies you could smell before you had your keys out. Jars of beans that tasted like hard work and a good aunt. Bethany Quill set her honey out by color the way her grandmother had taught her. A row of golds that needed no labels to be understood by anyone who'd ever put a spoon in a jar after supper. "Your stickers are crooked," Lawsonhart said, his voice like a radio host explaining something you didn't need explained. He rested his coffee cup on Bethany's table as if the table were lucky to have it. "They're straight enough to sell," Bethany said without looking up. "I could help," Lawson said. He had a face the county forgave too much and a shine on him that didn't come from work. Since he'd blown into town 3 months earlier, he'd called himself a producer, a fixer, a man who knew men. He knew how to stand too close and how to lean on a story until the truth bent to fit the angle. "I don't need edges sanded," Bethany said, counting change. "I need people to tell each other the honey's good." "I can make them talk," Lawson said. "We could tell your story right." Beth Quill. The sound of it. Artisan. Heritage. Sustainable. Bees. Bethany said. "The word you're looking for is bees. They do the work. I try not to make it harder." Lawson bought 2 jars he didn't need and left one with his number taped to the lid. Before lunch, he'd done the same at the goat cheese table and the salsa stand and the pies that had been bought by the PDA and resold with a markup that tasted like bandroom. 2 weeks later, the valley lost its rhythm. Cows at the Tate Dairy went stubborn. A rooster stood on a gate at noon and watched the sun like he had news he couldn't deliver. Queenrite hives went fidgety and lost heart. Honey that should have poured heavy came off light. The air tasted wrong, not bad. Exactly. But like a glass of water left near open paint. Bethany walked her lot at dawn and dusk. Listening. The bees talked among themselves as they always had. A hum that sat inside your chest like a second breathing. But they came home without dances. They made no circles with their abdomens to write the map of nectar on their comb. Something had leaned on their story and bent it. She found it at the third stand, a small bundle tucked under the cinder block like a child's toy left behind. Sweet fern. Cedar. Red thread. The knot was pretty in the way a snake's skin is pretty. At first glance it was decoration. Let your eyes soften and you saw a mouth sewn shut. Someone had been meddling who didn't know the difference between a charm and a gag. Bethany didn't waste time with outrage. She built a clean fire in the wash tub, burned the bundle, scattered salt where the smoke wandered, and spoke to the hives in a voice that knew her grandmother's exact insistence. "Forgive me," she said. "I will set this right." That afternoon she found Lawson in the churchyard filming a woman who didn't attend that church. He leaned against a stone with a camera and a smile that assumed permission. "You set your threads at my place," Bethany said. "Threads?" Lawson said, smiling into his sunglasses. "Promises," Bethany said. "You say them to hear yourself talk, and then you forget to pay the bill." "I offered exposure," Lawson said. "People like a story. I'm telling yours." "In this county, story is work," Bethany said. "You treat it like decoration and it breaks." He raised both hands as if a misunderstanding had landed on the table between them. "Let me help. Dinner. A little piece we can pitch to the magazine in Knoxville. Quill honey. Heritage. Sustainable. I don't want to be a brand," Bethany said. "I want my bees to come home." Lawson dropped the smile half an inch. Enough to show the hunger under it. "Everything's a brand. He said, "You either choose it or it chooses you. Go choose somewhere else," Bethany said, and left him to his camera and his empty cup. At dusk, the chimes sounded at Bethany's porch, 3 soft tings that came not from wind but from intention. A presence settled on the step and did not bother with stealth. "You work clean," said the voice Bethany had only heard at weddings and once at a wreck. "I appreciate that." Bethany did not turn. She had honey on her hands and the habit of finishing what she started. "If you like clean work, you'd stop pushing," she said. "I am push," said Merritt Thorn, appearing in the corner of her sight like a word you know but won't say. "I am the bargain you make when cash won't cover it. The line that holds when men forget where they put it." "Men don't forget," Bethany said. "They ignore. There's a difference." "Ignorance keeps me fed," Merritt said lightly. "And you?" "I like my meals honest," Bethany said. "What do you want?" "To be asked," Merritt said. "Offer me your problem. I will fix it so well you'll regret my thoroughness." "No," Bethany said. "You've got your teeth in something else tonight. Go to it and leave my yard be." Merritt smiled as if she'd complimented his hat. "We'll see," he said, and left the air cooler than when he arrived. There are nights the valley keeps its own calendar. Word went out without a phone, and folks who still baked on Saturdays and stacked firewood on Sundays felt it land on their shoulders like a shawl. The old pact, not written but kept, called for a reckoning at Verdict Stone, a flat of moss-slick rock where the ridge slips its shoulder and looks down into a hand-shaped valley. They came because their parents had, because the animals did, because something in them knew there were rules older than the county code. Hounds lay with their throats closed. 3 deer stepped out of the shadow line and stood in the grass as if the valley had offered them chairs. Crows crowded a poplar and pretended not to count. Bees wore Bethany's hair like a crown and did not sting. Nora came with Hester and Luann, one hand in Hester's and the other pressed low, breathing careful. Daniel came because he had fired a shot nobody could take back. Bethany came because someone had tied a knot with her name in it. Royce Talbot came because he loved a grudge more than his own sleep. At the center, Merritt Thorn waited in a suit a little too fine for here, shoes that had never seen pasture. He wasn't much to look at, shorter than you wanted him to be, older than you could hold in your head, but he wore attention like a coat. When he smiled, a few men smiled back before they realized they'd been recruited. Mabel Kerr stepped onto the stone with a cane that could have been a gavel if she needed it. She had married people in drought and buried them in flood, and once, when a bridge was down, performed 3 funerals by the light of a bait shop. She nodded to Pastor Redding, who had learned late in his life that the Lord's pasture was bigger than he'd imagined and wilder. He kept his hat in his hands and his mouth shut. "By call of the old pact," Mabel said, her voice neither loud nor kind, but something that made the night lean in. "We convene. The accused will answer. The harmed will speak. The ground will be respected." Hester raised her wrist and showed the faded mark the Pike women had carried for 2 generations. "By this," she said, "and by the boar at the crossing and the lime Merritt told me when the river took my kitchen floor." "Noted," Mabel said. Daniel squared his shoulders as if they knew how. "By blood on a pasture that was trying to be quiet," he said. "By lines crossed by men who like to move something that isn't theirs." "Noted," Mabel said. Bethany lifted a frame of comb that should have been heavy and was not. "By work undone," she said. "By someone binding the mouth of my hives with a knot meant to impress a camera." "Noted," Mabel said, and turned to Merritt. "You stand accused of leveraging need into debt and debt into appetite." Merritt spread his hands in a gesture that could have been worship if you didn't know better. "I kept this valley alive more times than you count," he said. "I propped roofs. I turned sickness. I whispered warning in a fool boy's ear before he stepped in the wrong truck." "And you collected," Mabel said. "Everything costs," Merritt said. "Not defensive, only correct. If you don't know that, you haven't lived here." A ripple ran along the rim of watchers. May Ellen Vaughn stepped forward, thin and straight with hair that had gone white between one Wednesday and the next. "You gave my husband a year without whiskey," she said to Merritt. He fixed the bathroom floor he'd promised, and he took our girl to the fair. Then the luck ran dry like somebody shut off a spigot. He fell twice as hard and left a hole in our house I still trip in. I ain't saying you poured anything down him. I'm saying your gift came back hungry. Merritt listened the way a man listens to a weather report. Your husband made the hole. He said, I cannot be blamed for gravity. Mabel lifted her cane and rapped the stone onto a sound small enough to be ignored and large enough not to be. We'll do this in order, she said, and looked to Pastor Redding. The Pact says the accused is given voice and the harmed are given theirs. It also says a debt can be weighed. Pastor Redding nodded. Let justice be more than revenge, he said, and left the sentence there for the night to complete. Hester told the flood story clean. No flourishes. No excuses. She admitted her own foolishness by name. Daniel told the line story without dressing it up. He didn't ask the stone to excuse his shot. He asked it to see how fast trouble had driven, and how many years it had taken to gather speed. Bethany told about knots and cameras, and bees who went quiet when a man treated work like style. Lawson Hart opened his mouth to be charming and found no one interested. I didn't mean harm, he said anyway. I was selling a dream. In this county, Bethany said, a dream is a tool. If you don't know how to hold it, put it down. Mabel turned back to Merritt. You claim this child, she said, nodding to Nora's belly. Merritt's gaze shifted. Not a step, but a decision. He didn't reach. He didn't dare. But the attention itself made the air colder. An agreement was made. He said, first good thing born after the flood broke. I am here to collect what was owed. Nora bent double with the next contraction and would have gone to the ground if Lewin hadn't been there to catch her. The women cleared space without instruction. Quilts went down. Hands took their places. Men stepped back, which is sometimes the best help men can give. Mabel faced Merritt and didn't blink. Bring the terms, she said,